Today's video is going to be a little different than normal. There's still going to be some build involved, but we're going to be taking a look at Glaives. And today we're going to try to answer 3 questions. The first being, why are Glaives either loved or hated? When you talk to somebody, they either love Glaives or they absolutely despise them and think they should be taken out of the game as a whole. Second, how are our class Glaives performing since the Glaives buffs and their personal buffs? Of course, these Glaives have been around for almost 2 years and nobody uses them. Glaives as a whole got a buff, these class Glaives got a buff, so let's see how they're performing. And finally, are they any good? Can we use these in end game scenarios? Can we use these in our normal build? So with that, let's get right into this video. Let's start by looking at that first question. Why are they so loved or hated? Well, that question needs a little bit of history on Glaives. This weapon type came out in Witch Queen. They came out very strong. They could take so many things. I remember running day 1 Valve the Disciple and using Glaives to survive Caretaker's Ground Stop in order to get past that encounter. But since then, they had nerfs, so has a lot of the exotic armor we loved using with them. Looking at you, Syntheseps, I'm so sorry. I feel like older players who've been around since then have a bad taste in their mouth because we know what this weapon type is fully capable of in a sandbox that favors them, and now they're just awkward stabby six that can shoot, guard a few attacks, and don't synergize with like any of the perks. Like, for example, Volt Shot is very awkward on a Glaive, and for a long time Grave Robber didn't work on Glaive. So all that stuff, just it adds up, and people over time just like, this weapon type is just not worth it. And I think that's where a lot of the older players are when it comes to Glaives. For newer players, I believe the best way to put it is that they're just blissfully ignorant of what they used to be and believe that Glaives are in a good spot. Back then, even just in Lightfall, Glaives are really strong because we had Winterbite and Synthoceps, and that gave us the highest damage we could see on a Glaive at that time. But with the reworks Glaives got at the beginning of this season, I think they feel better, but they are still not where they need to be, what leads us to our second question. How are Glaives performing as a whole, and how are the class exotic Glaives performing now that they got some buffs? Well, let's look at the changes that Glaives got as a whole. They increased the projectile speed and damage inside of PvE, reduced the cooldown before we can melee after we shoot, but the big one is the shield change they made. Now when we have our Glaives out, we gain 1% of our shield every second. I wish this is more, but it is a start, and it helps our class Glaives as their exotic perks rely heavily on their shield energy. Before we continue to talk about the exotic Glaives, I will say that regular Glaives definitely feel a little bit better than what they used to. Of course, they are still very situational at best. Of course, if you have Unstoppable Glaive, that is really where we're going to want to use these. Back to the exotic Glaives, they also got a few different changes, like the ability to load one shot into the magazine when using their exotic perk. They no longer drain shield when activating the perk or having the perk active, and it remains active when we stow the Glaive. These are honestly some very good overall quality of life changes just for these Glaives as a whole. And now let's look at the specific exotics. We're going to start with the Hunter exotic, which is Arc, and it is Edge of Concurrence. It comes with the trait Lightning Seeker. When weapon energy is full, consume it before firing to make your next shot track targets across the ground and unleash chain lightning on impact. The change they made with this particular Glaive is that it now works with our Arc subclass, allowing the Lightning Seeker to jolt targets, chain that jolt to other targets, which makes it better for ad clear, and again, it really adds to the functionality of this Glaive, giving us the ability to synergize it with our Arc subclass. Moving on, we have Edge of Action, the Titan Glaive. It is void and has the trait Remote Shield. When weapon energy is full, consume it before firing to make your next shot deploy a protective shield on impact. This is just the bubble you have at home. It does give out a Void Overshield, which makes it very good for endgame content, as it gives us that 50% damage reduction inside of PvE. At the start of this season, it got the ability to give out a buff to reload speed, handling, and a small small amount of stacking bonus damage when passing through the bubble. It was already an extremely nice glaive to have in endgame content, and now that it has that stacking bonus and all those bonuses it can give, it's just that nice little extra cherry on top. The final glaive that we're going to look at is Edge of Intent, the Warlock glaive. It is solar and comes with the perk Restorative Turret. When weapon energy is full, consume it before firing to make your next shot deploy a healing turret on impact. This, much like the Hunter glaive, got the added benefit of being able to play into our solar subclass a lot easier, as they made their normal healing change to cure and restoration. And when you shoot it at an ally, as long as they are within 8 meters of where it lands, they will get an immediate burst of that cure and restoration. This is great if you want to make a nice support and healing setup, which I'm a sucker for, but there are better options to obtain this idea of a build with way less restrictions. Now for the final question, are they good? This is a very loaded question, as they are better than before, but they aren't where they need to be still. The exotic glaives are very situational. The Hunter one is probably the most fun to use, but in high-end content, it really can't compete, as it's really hard for that Lightning Seeker ability to actually kill things outside of Thrall and just normal red bars inside of things like a Grandmaster. It is still, honestly, though, one of my favorite ones to use. When I was testing this and playing with it, I was like, this is the most fun glaive I've ever played with, but fun doesn't always make it good to use. And I know that's normally the opposite of what I say, but this glaive really just doesn't compete in endgame content. The Warlock one is great for healing and having a build like that, but like I said earlier, there are better, more efficient options to use with things like Luma and Boots of the Assembler, or just running healing grenades with Verity's Brow. There are just a ton of really good healing options, and I don't feel like Edge of Intent really pushes that boundary to make it a good option to pair with one of those healing support builds. And finally, the glaive that I think is the best for endgame PvE content is the Titan one, with the mini bubble that works with Helm of Saint 14 to blind targets, the guaranteed 50% damage reduction from that overshield, and the other buffs that it gives out for just passing through the bubble off the glaive. I think this glaive works the best consistently inside of endgame content, no matter what you're trying to run. In the end though, I recommend using them for yourself and forming your own opinion, as you should with everything in life. Just because I say, hey, objectively, the Titan one is the best, that doesn't mean to say you won't like the Hunter one in endgame content. You won't like the Warlock one in endgame content. Everybody who plays this game has a different playstyle, and these glaives could easily fit that playstyle. So with that, that is the end of our video. I hope you found this somewhat informative, so this way you can move on throughout the season and maybe try these glaives if you have them, form your own opinion about them, and maybe, just maybe, attempt to use them in some sort of endgame content, whether that even just be Master Lost Sectors or even Grandmasters this season. We have a very long season ahead of us, so I do plan on kind of changing things up and trying some very weird things in Grandmasters to see how they work, because I want to be able to figure out what they work. I have the time, I may as well try it. So like, comment, and subscribe if you want to keep seeing more. I did make builds for all of these glaives, so I will leave all the dim links down in the description, and I hope to see you guys in the next video.